The cup left her hand before she noticed she'd let go. It spun in the dark of the shuttle bay, catching the light in slow, lazy turns, and Thalvex didn't reach for it. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the black beyond the viewport, where the black wasn't empty anymore. Ships filled the crater's shadow, hung in perfect rows like something that had waited a long time to be seen. She counted 3. She counted 30. She stopped counting. Her antennae, usually soft and always moving, had gone rigid against her skull. She could feel her own pulse in the tips of them. The species the Coalition called barely space-capable was showing her 200 warships built in total secret, and not one of them had ever shown up on a single survey. "What is this?" Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. A voice answered over the comm, warm and steady. The kind of voice a person used when they already knew the answer would change everything and wanted to be gentle about it anyway. "Earth Defense Fleet, Commander. We've been waiting for the right moment." The shuttle drifted forward. Nobody moved to catch the cup. It kept turning, throwing small circles of light across the cabin wall, patient as a held breath. I wish I could tell you what she said next. But first, you should know how close she came to never seeing this at all. 11 days before that, the only light on her bridge came from a cracked emergency panel, and the cup in her hand held water rationed to the last mouthful. The debris field hadn't been marked on any chart. It should have been. Thalvex had run the same trade route for 6 years without so much as a scratch on the hull, and then a rock the size of a fist had come out of the dark and torn straight through the luminous drift's main engine core. The ship screamed before the crew did. Metal has its own voice for that kind of pain. "Cascade failure," Marco said, hauling herself up through the access hatch, her skin already dropping from its usual pale green into a deep, worried blue. "Core containment held. Barely. But we lost the primary drive, and the backup's bleeding power into the hull breach faster than I can patch it." "Numbers, Marco." Thalvex kept her voice level. 15 people were watching her, and panic was contagious in a small ship. "Give me numbers." 18 days. Marco didn't look up from the readout. "That's what the backup cells have left if we cut everything but life support and running lights. After that, we go dark, and dark means we stop breathing." Nobody said anything. The ship hummed around them, quieter than it should have been. "And the nearest station?" 8 months away if the drive worked, which it doesn't. Pip, the young navigator, made a small sound at a station, feathers gone from bright yellow to a dull, frightened grey. She was barely out of training, chosen for this route because it was supposed to be the safe one. "There has to be something closer," Thalvex said. "Anything. A relay station, a mining outpost, a fuel depot, I don't care how small." "I'm already looking." Pip's hands moved fast over her console, and her voice had the particular calm of someone who needed to sound calm more than she felt it. "Coalition charts only cover registered space. Outside that, we're flying blind." "Then look outside the charts." It took her 4 hours. 4 hours of the temperature dropping half a degree at a time, of Wren rationing the last of the hot meals, of Dr. Vin dimming the medical bay lights to save power, and the crystal ridges along her arms throwing sad little rainbows across the wall. Then Pip made a sound that wasn't fear. "There's a system, unregistered, not unregistered, just nobody's bothered to log it properly. One habitable world. The locals call it Earth." She looked up. "Coalition notes say primitive, barely FTL capable, not worth a formal survey." "Distance?" 12 days at our current output." 12 days. Thalvex did the math without wanting to. 18 days of power, 12 days of travel, 6 days to spare if nothing else went wrong. It was thin. It was also the only number on the board that didn't end with all of them dead in the dark. "Set a course," she said. "Wren, get me a distress signal out on the standard Coalition band. Tell them who we are, tell them what we need, and tell them we're not proud." Wren's 4 hands moved across the comm array without hesitation. That was the thing about Wren. No wasted motion, no wasted words ever. Signal away, Ren said. If anyone out there's listening. For a while, nobody was. The 10 days that followed didn't feel like 10 days. They felt like one long grey hour that kept repeating. The crew moved in slow motion to save air. Meals went from warm to cold to nothing but paste. Only 4 of them stayed awake at a time. The rest slept in shifts because sleeping bodies used less oxygen than talking ones. Thalvex found herself standing over Pip's shoulder more often than she needed to, watching the young navigator refuse, again and again, to stop hunting for a better answer even after there wasn't one. It was stubborn. It was also the only thing that made anyone on that bridge laugh in 10 days, when Pip muttered that if Earth turned out to be boring, she was filing a formal complaint with a species that didn't have an embassy. Marco's skin had settled into a permanent, exhausted blue-gray by the 6th day. She still checked the containment field every 2 hours, out of habit more than hope. "We're going to make it," Thalvex told her, on one of those checks, quiet enough that no one else would hear if it wasn't true. Marco didn't answer right away. 18 days, she finally said. "That's what I told you. I didn't say we'd use all of them well." On the 10th day, Ren's console lit up with something that wasn't static. "Commander," Ren's voice cracked, just slightly, the first crack in 10 days of perfect control. "I have a response." Thalvex crossed the bridge before she'd finished deciding to move. A voice came through. Human, warm, speaking coalition, standard with an accent that curled at the edges like it belonged to a song rather than a language. "Luminous drift, this is Earth orbital control. We have your distress call. Help is coming. Repeat, help is coming. You are not alone out there." Nobody on the bridge spoke. Pip's feathers, for the first time in 10 days, lifted. The guidance ship that met them at the edge of the system was small, sleek, and moved like it knew exactly where it was going. Pip tracked it on approach, her voice climbing with something that wasn't fear anymore. 30 platforms, she said. "At least 30, Commander. Orbital stations, shipyards, something that looks like a full colony out past the second moon. This isn't in any file we have." "Primitive," Marco said, from a console, not quite a question. Thalvex watched the numbers climb on the screen and said nothing. The coalition survey she'd read before this run called Earth, developing, non-critical, minimal infrastructure. Whoever wrote that had either never looked or had chosen not to. The guidance ship locked a tow beam onto the luminous drift's hull, gentle as a hand under an injured wing, and walked them in through a field of debris that had clearly been swept clear on purpose. Someone down there had been doing this a while. "They fly like they've caught 100 ships exactly this broken," Ren said. "Maybe they have." The docking clamps engaged with barely a shudder. After 10 days of every sound on the ship meaning something was about to fail, the silence that followed felt strange enough to be its own kind of alarm. Then the airlock cycled, and a woman stepped through it before the seal had even finished hissing shut. She was human, Thalvex had seen images, but never one in person. Dark hair pulled back, a uniform without a single wasted seam, and eyes that went straight to the crew's faces instead of the ship's damage. "Director Amara Hayes," she said. "Station Concord, you've had a hard run. Let's fix that first, talk after." She didn't ask about payment. She didn't ask about cargo manifests or trade licenses or any of the dozen questions Thalvex had braced herself to answer. She looked at Pip's dull grey feathers and Dr. Vin's dimmed crystal ridges and said one thing to the medic standing behind her. "Full intake, all 15. Warm quarters first, questions later." "You knew our crew count," Thalvex said. "You sent it with your distress call." Hayes almost smiled. "We read the whole thing, Commander, every word." They were moved through corridors that hummed with a kind of order Thalvex hadn't expected from a species the charts called barely capable. Clean air, steady gravity, walls the warm color of something built to be lived in rather than merely survived. Human engineers in grey coveralls were already crawling over the luminous drift's hull, by the time they reached their quarters, cutting into the ruined engine core like they'd done it 100 times. Hayes brought the coffee herself. "It's not much," she said, setting the cup in Thalvex's hands. White ceramic, a hairline crack near the rim, steam curling off the top. "But it's hot, and I figured you hadn't had anything hot in a while." Thalvex lifted it and drank before she could think better of it. Bitter, warm, smoke, and something like burnt sugar underneath. It was the first thing in 10 days that hadn't tasted like rationing. "Careful," Hayes said, watching her face. "That reaction's the reason half my staff can't stop making it." For a moment, just a moment, nobody on either side needed to be strategic about anything. 2 weeks passed inside that warmth. The crew slept in real beds. Meals came hot, 3 times a day, no rationing math attached. Pip spent most of her free hours in the observation deck, feathers slowly climbing back toward yellow, watching Earth's ships move below with the open hunger of someone who wanted to understand everything at once. It was Marco who found the first crack in the story Earth had been telling everyone. "Commander," she caught Thalvex in the corridor outside the repair bay, skin flickering between blue and a startled orange. "You need to see the drive." The luminous Drift's engine bay didn't look like a repair job anymore. It looked like a different ship. The ruined core had been replaced with something Marco couldn't name, lines of it humming with a smoothness their old drive had never had. "This isn't reverse-engineered salvage," Marco said. "This is better than anything the Coalition sells, better than anything I've ever seen." Tors, the lead engineer, a broad man with grease on his hands and no interest in hiding his pride, overheard and didn't bother denying it. 33 years ago," he said, "we caught a Coalition probe that strayed too close, didn't ask permission, took it apart down to the last wire, and then we asked ourselves a question nobody in your Coalition ever thought to ask about us." "Which question?" "What happens if the primitive world stops being primitive and nobody notices in time?" Thalvex felt her antennae go still, the way they did when a piece of information landed heavier than expected. "You've been lying to the whole galaxy." "We've been quiet," Hayes said, arriving in time to hear the last of it, her voice carrying no apology at all. "There's a difference, Commander. We didn't lie. We just let the Coalition believe what was convenient for them to believe. It cost us nothing, and it bought us time." "Time for what?" Hayes didn't answer that. Not yet. She tapped her data pad twice, a small habit Thalvex had noticed she did whenever a hard decision sat behind her eyes, and changed the subject to hull tolerances instead. That night, alone in her quarters, Thalvex turned the cracked cup over in her hands and thought about a world that had let an entire galaxy underestimate it on purpose. It should have unsettled her more than it did. Instead, for the first time in 10 days, she slept without dreaming about the debris field. The rehook came 3 mornings later, and it didn't come gently. Hayes found her on the observation deck, where Pip had taken to spending her mornings. She didn't sit. She held out her data pad, screen already lit, and let Thalvex read it herself instead of softening it first. "You should see this before the news feeds get louder about it," Hayes said. The header alone stopped Thalvex's breath. SARCON Imperium forces cross into VELIX Dominion space. Multiple SYSDMS under attack. "Green Haven," Thalvex said before she'd finished reading the second line. Her voice didn't sound like her own. "That's Green Haven. That's—" She stopped. "Commander." "My children are on Green Haven." The cup in her other hand had started to shake, just slightly, and she set it down before it could show any more than it already had. "They're on Green Haven, Director, right in front of that fleet." Hayes's expression didn't change, but her hand found the data pad again, tapping it twice against her palm. "Then we don't have as much time as I hoped we would," she said. "Get some rest, Commander. Tomorrow there's something else you need to see, something I wasn't ready to show anyone yet." The alarm on Hayes's data pad went off before dawn. and she didn't wait for Thalvex to finish dressing before she started talking. Sarkhan forces have pushed past the outer Velix systems, Hayes said, already moving down the corridor at a pace that left no room for questions. Green Haven hasn't fallen, not yet, but their timeline just got shorter, and so did ours. Thalvex kept pace, antennae rigid, her mind running the same math it had run for 18 days on a dying ship, except now the countdown belonged to her children instead of her crew. You said there was something to show me. There is, someone actually. Hayes rounded a corner into a private hangar bay, where a lean, grey-haired man in a plain uniform stood waiting beside a transport shuttle, arms crossed, watching them approach with the patience of someone who'd done this exact thing before. Commander Thalvex, Admiral Carter. Carter didn't offer platitudes. He offered his hand instead, and when Thalvex took it, her tactile reader caught something in the grip, steady, unhurried. No trace of the deception she'd half expected to find in a species that had lied to an entire galaxy about its own strength. Commander, he said, I understand your family's in the invasion path. You understand correctly. Then you'll want to see this before we say another word about strategy. He gestured to the shuttle. It's a short flight. I'd rather show you than tell you. The shuttle lifted clear of Station Concorde's shadow, and Earth fell away below them, blue and startlingly whole. Thalvex watched it shrink through the viewport, thinking about a survey document that had called this world barely worth the ink. Pip's voice crackled through on a private channel, unable to help herself. Commander, are you seeing the shuttle telemetry? We're not headed toward any listed station. I know, Pip. Then where? I don't know yet. Beside her, Carter reached into a compartment and produced 2 cups, handing one across without ceremony. Not the bitter blend Hayes had given her that first night. Something lighter, herbal, faintly sweet. Long flight, he said simply. Figured you could use something in your hands. It was such a small, ordinary gesture that for a moment Thalvex forgot to be afraid of whatever waited at the end of this trip. She wrapped both hands around the warmth and said nothing, and Carter didn't fill the silence either. He seemed like a man who trusted silence to do its own work. Halfway through the flight, when the moon's grey curve filled most of the forward window, Carter finally spoke again, and it was the first real thing he'd said since the hangar. You should know the timeline's worse than what's on the public feeds, he said. Sarkhan advanced ships have already reached the systems bordering Green Haven. Whatever we're going to do, we don't have the luxury of doing it slowly. Thalvex's grip tightened on the cup. How much time? Less than we'd like, more than none. He didn't look away from her when he said it. That's the honest answer, Commander. I won't dress it up prettier than that. It wasn't comfort. It was something better, the truth, offered plainly, from a man who clearly didn't waste words he didn't mean. Something in her chest, some old merchant's instinct for reading a person by what they didn't say, told her this was a man worth trusting. The shuttle banked, sweeping low over Luna's far side, and Carter's voice dropped into something almost gentle. Commander, look up. She had been staring at her cup. She looked up. At first there was only the grey dust of the crater floor, unremarkable, the kind of surface she'd flown over 100 times on 100 worlds. Then the shuttle cleared a low ridge, and the crater opened beneath them, and the grey dust wasn't empty anymore. Ships, rows of them, hulls dark against the pale rock, running lights dimmed to almost nothing, arranged with a precision that spoke of years, not months. The formation stretched from one edge of the crater to the other, farther than her eyes could hold in one look. She had seen this exact sight before, not with her own eyes, in the dream that hadn't been a dream, in the moment she still couldn't place, a flash of the same crater, the same ships, the same held breath. She pushed the thought aside. There wasn't time for it now. How long, she whispered, have these been sitting here? Since before you were flying trade routes for the Coalition, Carter said. We built this in silence, piece by piece, ship by ship, hoping we'd never have to use it. Hoping was never the same as believing we wouldn't. The cup slipped in her hand. She caught it before it fell, but only barely, her antennae locked so rigid they ached. "This is the Earth Defense Fleet," Carter said. "Every ship you're looking at has been ready for years. We built it because we understood something the Coalition never did about your kind, or ours, or anyone's. That a galaxy this large eventually asks you to prove what you're made of, and it's better to already know the answer before it does." "Why show me this?" "Because Green Haven's about to find out what happens when a galaxy underestimates the wrong people twice in the same year." Carter's voice hadn't risen once, and somehow that made the words land harder than shouting could have. "We're not asking permission to help, Commander. We're telling you it's already decided. What we need from you is everything you know about the Sarkhan formation doctrine, their supply lines, their command structure, anything that gets our people there faster and gets your people out alive." For a long moment, Thalvex couldn't speak at all. She thought of her children on Green Haven, of a message she hadn't been able to send in 18 days, of a coalition that had left this world's true face hidden behind a lie of convenience for who knew how long. "You'll have everything I know," she said finally. "All of it tonight." Carter nodded once, like a man closing a deal he'd never doubted, and reached for the comm panel to signal the fleet's forward operations deck. That was when the second voice came through, not Carter's, not Hayes's. A woman's voice, clipped and urgent, breaking hard into the private channel with none of the calm the last two humans had shown her. "Admiral, Fleet Command, we just picked up a Sarkhan transmission out of the Green Haven corridor. It's not troop movements." A pause, and in it Thalvex heard something that made her stomach drop before the words even landed. "It's an evacuation order. Their own evacuation order. Someone over there already knows we're coming." Carter's jaw tightened, the first real crack Thalvex had seen in him. "Copy. Get me a channel to the fleet commander. Now." The shuttle kept descending toward the waiting ships, and Thalvex sat very still, the warm cup forgotten in her hands, understanding that whatever this new complication meant, it had just made everything faster and far more dangerous than any of them had planned for an hour ago. "Fleet Command, report," Carter said, and the officer's voice came back tighter than before. "It's not a trap, Admiral. We pulled the translation twice to be sure. The Sarkhan evacuation order isn't for troops. It's a civilian pullback. They're clearing 3 systems ahead of Green Haven. Best guess is Admiral Vexcor wants a clean advance, no witnesses, no survivors to complicate the record." Thalvex felt the cup go cold in her hands. "They're not retreating. They're making room to finish it." "That's our read too," Carter said. Hayes's voice joined from the shuttle's rear comm, steady as ever, though Thalvex caught the double tap of her data pad against her palm before she spoke. Then the timeline just collapsed to hours, not days. "Commander, we need everything you have. Now." Thalvex didn't hesitate. She'd spent 18 days learning exactly how little time meant when it ran out, and she wasn't going to waste a second of what remained arguing about trust. "Sarkhan doctrine relies on numbers and formation discipline," she said. "Rigid columns, standard approach vectors, no deviation once an attack begins. Admiral Vexcor has never lost a campaign, and he's never had to improvise one either. Hit the formation at an angle their doctrine doesn't have a name for, and they won't adjust fast enough to save themselves." Carter was already keying it into the fleet's tactical display, his face unreadable, his hands steady. "That's exactly the kind of gap we needed." The shuttle set down inside the crater, and for a moment everyone was quiet, the ordinary sound of the landing struts settling into dust the only thing in the cabin. Thalvex set her cup, the herbal one, borrowed, not her own, into the holder beside her seat, and reached instead for the cracked white one she'd carried from the luminous drift. It had ridden in her jacket pocket the whole flight, and she hadn't noticed until now that her hand had gone looking for it the moment the danger became real. Carter noticed. He didn't comment on it. He simply held the hangar door for her, the way a man holds a door for someone who is about to do something hard. 3 hours later, on the launch deck of the lead carrier, Thalvex stood beside Hayes and Carter as 200 ships came alive around them. running lights climbing from dim to full, engines waking one after another down the length of the crater like a held breath finally let go. "Commander," Carter's voice, over the deck comm, calm enough to steady the whole crew listening. "This is the last chance to tell us we're wrong to do this." "You're not wrong." Thalvex looked out at the fleet, at every dark hull now blazing with light. "You're the only ones who were ever right." He nodded once. Then his voice shifted, carrying out across every ship in the formation, and the words came in threes, plain and hard, the kind of thing a crew remembers long after the mission ends. "We did not build this for conquest. We did not build this to be seen. We built this so that when someone needed us, we would already be ready." The fleet answered with a single pulse of light down every hull, formation lock engaging across 200 ships at once. "Jump in 60, Carter said. Thalvex found a place near the forward viewport and held her cracked cup in both hands, the way she'd held it on the bridge of a dying ship 18 days ago, the way she'd held it every time the world had asked more of her than she thought she had. The jump came without ceremony. Space folded and then unfolded, and the fleet was somewhere else entirely. The black sky over Green Haven, the Sarkin advance column spread wide in its rigid, confident formation, exactly where Thalvex had said it would be. "They're not adjusting," Carter said, watching the tactical display. "Vexcor doesn't even know we're an angle his doctrine can't answer yet." The battle that followed was fast, and it was quiet in a way Thalvex hadn't expected. Human ships moving in patterns the Sarkin formation had no answer for, striking from vectors that broke every rule of the numerical warfare that had won them 47 systems, and never once needed to be clever. Within the hour, the Sarkin column was breaking apart, ships peeling away from a formation that couldn't survive being wrong for the first time in 300 years. Thalvex watched a single Sarkin transport pull hard away from the fighting and vanish into FTL, and somewhere in that retreat she let herself believe, for the first time since the debris field, that her children were going to see her again. They found Green Haven's colony grounds untouched. The evacuation order had done exactly what Carter guessed, cleared the civilians, not the battlefield. And when Thalvex stepped off the transport onto familiar ground, two small shapes broke from a crowd of waiting Velix and ran toward her before anyone could stop them. She dropped to her knees and caught both of them at once, and for a long moment there was no fleet, no Sarkin Imperium, no galaxy at all. Just her children's arms around her neck and the cracked cup still, somehow in one hand, forgotten and unbroken. 3 days of strategy sessions followed at Station Concord, data shared freely in both directions now. Human officers and Velix negotiators working side by side over tables that had never once needed to raise a voice. Hayes found Thalvex on the observation deck during a quiet hour, the same deck where Pip still liked to watch the ships. "There's talk already," Hayes said, "about what to call this. An alliance, a partnership, something official with a name that sounds important in a briefing room." "Call it what it is." Thalvex turned the cup slowly in her hands, tracing the crack with one finger. "We are not primitive. We are just new to you. There is a difference." Hayes smiled at that, small and real. "I'll make sure it gets written down exactly like that." On her last morning at Station Concord, before the luminous drift launched for home under her own restored power, Thalvex found Pip on the observation deck one final time, feathers back to their full bright yellow, watching the human fleet cycle through routine drills below. "You never stopped looking for the answer," Thalvex told her, "even when there wasn't one yet." "Somebody had to," Pip said, and went back to watching the ships. The luminous drift cleared Earth's gravity well an hour later, engines humming with a strength they'd never had before the debris field tore them apart. Thalvex stood at the viewport and watched the blue world fall away behind her, smaller and smaller, until it was only one more light among all the others. She had come to Earth desperate and dying. She left with hope, friendship, and a war fleet at her back. The cracked cup sat cool in her hands, empty now, its warmth long gone but its shape unchanged, carried across a debris field, a crater full of hidden ships, and a battle that never should have gone the way it went. Thalvex set it on the console beside her chair, where she could see it, and did not put it away.